Since it's Easter time, I thought it'd be interesting to share this with you guys. This is a record from 1965 containing religiously oriented Easter stories, one on each side, and it was actually meant to accompany a film strip for use in schools. I found this in a local thrift store back in early 2011, and unfortunately it did not come with the original film strip, but then again, even the record alone is interesting in itself. First of all, it's on lovely green vinyl, a sure attraction point for some of you collectors out there. And the very odd way they did the runout groove. On both sides, there's what appears to be a large track separation band that leads out into a few grooves of silence, of course, ending in a silent lock groove. But that's not all. Following that lead-out groove, there are two more silent lock grooves as well. I guess that's designed for the way that schools had their equipment set up to play their record. Further evidence of this is attributed to a note on the inner sleeve. Most cathedral records are recorded with an inaudible low-frequency signal under each celeste in order to actuate automatic equipment. This signal may cause very light pickup arms to jump a groove at the celeste. Well, I don't have to worry about any skipping issues because after all, the tone arm on this turntable has a tracking force of about 4.5 grams. And curiously, although it says that a narration for worship use in the teaching of older children and adults is on the obverse side with a special narration for the children on the reverse side, they seem to have gotten that the other way round for this record, in that the children's stories on side 1 and the adult stories on side 2. Well, anyways, enjoy.
Cathedral Films presents Stories for Easter. The Easter Donkey.
Long ago, in a faraway land called Palestine, winter was over, and the arrival of spring held a special excitement for a little brown donkey named Christopher. Christopher had waited oh so long for spring to come. For this year, he would be big enough to go with the other donkeys to the great city of Jerusalem. Though he lived with his mother and his grandfather Nicholas in a warm and cozy stable, Christopher longed to see the wide world beyond the hills. This would be an exciting time, for in the spring, everyone went to Jerusalem for a celebration called the Passover. This was the morning they were to leave, and the courtyard was full of commotion. People were packing boxes and loading the donkeys with the things they wished to take on their journey. But it seemed they would never be ready to leave. So Christopher went from one to the other, trying to hurry them along. But he was a clumsy little donkey, and the more he tried to help, the worse things became. Until he fell over backwards. At last, his master put a firm hand on his neck and led him away, saying,
"Well, my anxious little donkey, every time you're out of my sight, you get into trouble, and I never know where you are from one moment to the next. Now, if you wish to go on the long journey to Jerusalem, you will carry these copper pans and pots. I will hear the rattle and clatter of their banging and know where you are and what you're up to every moment of the trip. This will keep you out of trouble."
Christopher hung his head and sighed. Cooking pots. Why, they made so much noise that everyone would laugh at him as he passed. Why couldn't he carry something of importance? His mother tried to comfort him.
"We cannot always do what we would like, Christopher. But you must always try to do the best you can, no matter what it is."
At last, the others were ready, and as they left the stable, Christopher found his grandfather Nicholas. Though Nicholas was very old, he was still strong and eager to make the journey. There were many people on the road, and whenever they would meet, Christopher saw their smiles and heard their laughter as he passed by with his noisy burden. But as they walked, Grandfather Nicholas began to tell Christopher the stories of his youth. And as the little donkey listened, he soon forgot the rattle of the pots on his back and was happy.
Yes, my boy. It wasn't far from here that I once battled a ferocious mountain lion. And then there was a time I swam the rapids and saved the load I was carrying. And did I ever tell you about the time?
Though it was a long journey, Grandfather's story made the time go quickly. And one day, they came to Bethany, a village on the outskirts of Jerusalem. They would rest here, and tomorrow they would enter the great city. At last, the copper pots were taken from Christopher's back. Then, just as the tired little donkey stretched to rest, into the stable yard came a caravan, a very rich caravan, laden with wondrous things that Christopher had never seen before. The proud donkeys carried their heads high, and on their backs there were shining silks and waving plumes and richly carved chests. There was even a peacock in a cage trimmed with gold. The leader of the caravan, a man with a black mustache, said that one of his donkeys had become lame and he needed another to carry his chest of precious jewels. When Christopher heard that, he didn't lose any time. He ran toward the man, hoping to be chosen, but in his haste, he didn't see the puddle of water in front of him. His feet slipped in the mud, and he landed in a very awkward position. But the man with the black mustache only laughed and surprised Christopher by saying,
Have that one ready at sunset. We'll rest until then.
Christopher couldn't believe his ears. At last, he was going to carry something important, something fit for a king. My, oh my, he thought excitedly. He might even carry his burden right to a palace and even see a king. As he stood there daydreaming about kings, Christopher heard the voice of a stranger. A man was talking to the owner of the donkeys. Christopher could only see the man's sandaled feet and the bottom of his white robe. But the man's voice was so kind. Christopher paused to listen. The stranger wanted 2 donkeys, a mother and her colt. He told the owner to tie the donkeys in front of the stable, and that the next day he would send 2 men for them. The stranger's voice was so gentle that for a moment Christopher forgot the caravan. He just knew that this stranger would be very kind to an animal, and he thought how nice it would be to be in his care. Then he remembered the caravan and ran off to tell his grandfather Nicholas of the riches he was to carry, and of how he might even see a king. After he had told his grandfather this news, the old donkey turned toward the distant hill and said,
You know, Christopher, that reminds me of something wonderful that happened to me when I was about your age. It was in a little town not far from here. I think we could see the town from the top of that hill. Let us go up there, and I'll tell you all about it.
And so, promising to be back at sunset when Christopher was to leave with the caravan, Nicholas led him through an open gate, and the 2 donkeys started off across the fields. As they went, the old donkey told Christopher the wondrous story of his youth. Old Nicholas admitted he'd been a lazy little donkey. Nevertheless, he had once been called upon to carry a woman named Mary on a journey to Bethlehem. But not being used to work, he was very slow, and when they finally arrived, they were put into a stable, as there was no room for them at the inn. It was there that Nicholas saw angels singing in the sky, and a bright star that shone down over the stable, and heard the first cries of the newborn baby.
It was a very special baby, Christopher. I knew the moment I looked at him, lying so peacefully in his manger of hay, that he was a king.
A king, Grandfather? Born in a stable? Kings are born in palaces.
That is true, but this was surely a king, and I had carried his mother, and he was born in a stable.
When they reached the top of the hill, the clouds in the sky had darkened, and Christopher felt a splash of rain on his nose. He was just about to ask Grandfather Nicholas if they shouldn't go back when the old donkey said,
Look, Christopher, there is Bethlehem.
And as the two donkeys watched, the dark clouds parted, and the sun sent its shining rays down on the little town.
What happened to the little baby king, Grandfather?
I don't know, Christopher. I've looked for him all my life. But maybe you will find him now that you're going into the world.
Oh, I will look, Grandfather.
As the two donkeys started home, the rain began to fall harder until it splashed on the rocks and the grass about them.
Hurry, Grandfather! We must be back before the caravan leaves.
Just then, there was a big flash of lightning above Christopher's head and a clap of thunder that scared him so he darted behind a rock to hide. And then there was a terrible crashing sound. When he looked up, he saw the tree behind him had been hit by lightning, and that Grandfather Nicholas lay trapped under the heaviest branch. As Christopher approached, Nicholas said,
Go on home, Christopher, and send someone back for me. You'll miss the caravan if you stay to help me.
For a moment, Christopher thought of the peacock in the golden cage and the jewels he would carry to faraway places. He knew that if he left now, he could get back to the caravan in time. But his grandfather needed help, so he set to work. He tugged and pulled and worked until his weary legs ached. But Christopher didn't give up. And at last, the limb began to move, and Grandfather Nicholas was almost free. The storm had passed as quickly as it had come, and a beautiful sunset filled the sky. Christopher helped his grandfather up. It was long past sunset, and the caravan would be leaving now, without him. But he had saved his grandfather, and that was more important. It was very late when the two donkeys, cold and shivering, came limping back into the stable in Bethany. Grandfather Nicholas was put to bed at once, and Christopher went to tell his mother what had happened. His mother was proud of him, and she said,
Though you missed the caravan, Christopher, you will not have to carry your pots into Jerusalem. For tomorrow, 2 men are coming for us both, and this time you must be ready.
As he lay down to sleep, Christopher thought of all the things that had happened that day. The caravan, the golden cage with the peacock, the kind stranger whose voice he had heard that morning, and the story his grandfather had told him about the king. In the morning, 2 men came for Christopher and his mother. They were about to take them when the owner called out,
Hold on there. Why are you taking the donkeys?
Because our master has need of them.
Very well, you may have them.
Christopher was taken to a hillside where a group of men were gathered. They led the little donkey to their master. The moment this man spoke to him, Christopher remembered his voice. He was the kind-spoken stranger whom Christopher had heard the day before. They placed a robe on Christopher, and the man with the gentle voice mounted him. As they led him off, men walked alongside. Christopher wondered where they were going. He did not have to wait long to find out, for soon they entered the gate of the city. Crowds gathered and shouted as they passed. Christopher wondered what all this could mean. Suddenly, he realized that they were shouting praises to the man who was riding on his back. Hosanna, they cried, and the people laid down palm branches for Christopher to walk on. And then, in some strange way, Christopher knew. The man he carried wore no crown and had no jewels, but he was worth far more than these, for he was a king. It had to be the very same king that Grandfather Nicholas had seen long ago in Bethlehem. This man was Jesus, and Christopher had found him. If it hadn't been for the storm, if he hadn't stopped to help Grandfather Nicholas, he would never have carried Jesus. Proudly he walked through the city, for the burden he carried was light, and his heart was filled with joy. For Christopher had found the King.
Cathedral Films presents Stories for Easter. The Easter Witness.
This is the city of Jerusalem in the land of Judea. In the year 33 AD, it is a part of the vast Roman Empire. Our story begins in a Roman home. Here is Lucius, son of a centurion. He's living in Jerusalem, where his father is an officer in the army of Rome. Like fathers everywhere, the centurion longs for his son to follow in his footsteps. But Lucius finds pens and brushes more interesting than swords. Teachers of art are scarce in this strange land, where pictures are frowned upon as being a form of idol worship. Lucius spends many hours helping with the soldiers' horses and doing other chores in order to earn money to pay his teacher for lessons in drawing. The centurion, while recognizing the boy's sensitive and artistic nature, still hopes that this is a passing interest. He refuses to pay for the lessons, but agrees that Lucius may use his own money as he wishes. The teacher recognizes the boy's talent, his ability to copy forms and figures. You draw well, Lucius. These faces are well shaped. The eyes, ears, and noses. But there's one thing you lack. This face stares out at us. It is lifeless. Perhaps you're too young to understand feeling and emotions, but until you do, you will be only a mask maker, never an artist. That evening, Lucius wanders through the streets of Jerusalem. He thinks of what his teacher has said.
What does he mean, a mask maker? How can I show what people are thinking and feeling?
Lost in his daydreams, Lucius is almost knocked over by a stranger who rushes out of a doorway. Please excuse me, the man said. I didn't see you. I wasn't looking.
Oh, no, it was my fault. But what's the matter? Is something wrong?
He's up there in that room, the master. And I've been hearing such ugly rumors that there is danger for him and for the others too. Quickly, Lucius thinks to himself,
Can he mean the man called Jesus my father has mentioned? The one who has been causing all the trouble in the temple this week? What a good chance to see him. May I carry the water upstairs for you? It would be no trouble.
The man thanks Lucius and walks off into the night. The streets are almost deserted, for this is the night of the Passover, the Hebrew feast of the unleavened bread. As he carries the water to the upper room, Lucius wonders why there is so much talk about Jesus and why some people, even his father, call him a troublemaker. Quietly, he sets the pail inside the room, for Jesus is speaking, and then steps back beyond the door where he will not be seen. And then he takes time to look. There he is. But is that the face of a rebel? A troublemaker? Quickly, Lucius reaches for his materials. As he begins to sketch, he thinks to himself,
This is a face of kindness. Surely he will not object if I try to draw his picture.
Suddenly, Jesus is kneeling before his friends. He, their master, is washing their feet. Lucius can't understand it. This would never be done in the house of a Roman. His friends protest. They seem embarrassed, confused. One of them says, "You, Lord, washing my feet?"
You do not understand now what I am doing, but one day you will.
Now the master is back at the table. He is blessing the bread and passing it among them. He speaks, saying,
Take, eat. This is my body which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me.
All those present did as he asked and listened in awed silence. Then he gives them a cup of wine, and as they pass it around for each to drink, he says,
This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me.
As Lucius watches, he remembers the words of his teacher. Your faces lack feeling and emotion.
Is this what he means by emotion? This affection? This joy? This sadness? How can I show feeling, capture it with my brush?
Suddenly, he hears the unbelievable words of betrayal and senses the disbelief, the wonder, the protest.
But mark this, my betrayer is here, his hand with mine on the table. For the Son of Man is going his appointed way. But alas for that man by whom he is betrayed.
His friends look at the master in shocked disbelief. Each one seems to be wondering, is it I? Could I be the one? As Lucius studies each of them, his eyes come to rest on one whose expression is different than the others. Could this be the face of guilt? Suddenly, the man is leaving. But why? Lucius hurries down the stairs and watches as the man with the guilty look flees into the darkness. He waits nearby, and soon the rest of them come down the steps following Jesus and disappear into the night. In the light from a nearby window, Lucius continues to work on his drawing while he can still remember what he has just seen.
The master's face. It must be more than a mask. How can I show him as he really seems to be?
The silence is broken suddenly as men with torches and spears move swiftly through the street. And Lucius sees that the leader is the one who first left the upper room. Following along, he comes to an olive grove outside the city wall across the Cedron Valley. Clambering up the nearest tree, Lucius can see the master in the garden. As the crowd surrounds him, torches light up the night, and he sees the guilty one approach Jesus. But now this man does a very strange thing. He greets Jesus with a kiss. Lucius cannot understand. Why would he do this to a man he had just left a short time ago? But there is shouting. One of Jesus' friends has drawn his sword, and near him a man on the ground is holding his head as if an ear had been injured. The soldier sees the master. What is happening? Jesus breaks away from the soldiers, saying to his friend,
"Put up your sword,"
and kneels beside the wounded man, gently touching him on the ear. And the man was made well. Watching the faces of the mob, Lucius sees in some hate, anger, and triumph. In others, fear and bewilderment. Before he knows it, it is over, and he follows the crowd across the Cedron valleys, leading the master. The next morning, all Jerusalem is in tumult. Well, he finds himself pushed toward the Praetorium by a sea of men, another mob, and larger than the one the night before. Climbing on a vendor's cart, he sees Jesus wearing a crown of thorns standing beside Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate looks frightened, disturbed, as he says, "What is his crime? I have found nothing in him that deserves execution."
Execution? Death? Jesus is to die? Why, I am sure this man has done nothing to deserve execution. He is no criminal.
Jesus, with his hands tied and that crown of thorns on his head, but on his face, no hate, no show of pain. What is it he feels, Lucius wonders? Can it be sorrow, disappointment, love? Can it be love? Love for these men who've been so cruel? Looking at the mass of angry faces, young Lucius witnesses the intense hate that is kindled by mob violence. The boy's emotions are stunned by the sudden contrast between love and hate. Now the soldiers have forced the master to carry a cross. And the people cry, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" When this mob has passed him by, Lucius stands for a moment stunned, full of rage and sorrow and helplessness. Hours pass, and the sky grows dark. Lucius can see 3 crosses on a hill outside the city, outlined against a threatening sky. And he knows that on one cross hangs Jesus. The boy feels compelled to move closer to the hill called Golgotha, for deep down inside the young man senses that he is witnessing an event of staggering proportions. That this must indeed be a moment that men will not erase from history. The very atmosphere is charged with an awesome spiritual impact that defies words but touches the emotions. As Lucius gazes transfixed, a sudden crash of thunder roars out of the heavens and rumbles across the valley. Lightning flashes through the sky and the earth shakes with the violence of an earthquake. Those on the hill are terrified. They turn and flee back to the city. And as Lucius stands by the city gate, people return from the hill. They are sorrowing and puzzled and frightened and ashamed. No one wanted it. Still it happened. Now it is over. Saddened by the tragic events, Lucius slowly makes his way back to his home. In these 2 days, he has learned the difference between a mask and an emotion. Early on the first day of the week, the centurion calls his son to him. Lucius, I have purchased a horse from a man in Emmaus. I want you to go there today and bring it back to me. With further instruction from his father, Lucius sets out through the city streets to the gates and road beyond. Emmaus is 7 miles away. After the hot, dusty walk to Emmaus, Lucius rests in a bed of straw near the inn, waiting for the owner of the horse to return. As he lies there, his mind turns to the many strange events he has experienced the past 3 days, and he dozes off, wondering what it all means. Soon he is awakened by voices.
Take, eat. This is my body which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me.
There are 3 men sitting down to supper, and one of them is breaking bread and blessing it just as he had seen it done in the upper room. It couldn't be, but it is Jesus the Master. But how can this be? The same face looking at these men? Why, he was crucified 3 days ago. This is something Lucius cannot understand. It is a few days later. Lucius' father is looking at his son's drawings. He sees the scenes of the past week, the trial, the crucifixion, and he speaks to his son of the death of the young man called Jesus. Then it is Lucius' turn to tell of his trip. He shows a finished picture of the risen Christ as he saw him alive at Emmaus. It is difficult for the centurion to believe what his son has just told him. But it is evident the boy has witnessed a miracle. It is as my friend Cornelius said, as Jesus died on the cross. Truly, this man was the Son of God. Yes, this was the Son of God. And the words of this man who hung on the cross and who rose again from the dead have echoed down through the ages.
I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die.
This has been a production by Ryan Alexander, aka Old Music on Vinyl 1. If you like my videos, please subscribe now.